The Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, they're the people who set the test, and they've launched a campaign to try and help more people pass. They want to increase the national pass rate. It's called Ready to Pass, and in this video I'm going to comment on why I think they've done it and whether or not I think it's actually helpful. Firstly, I'm going to start off with why I think they've started this campaign, and I believe it's because of the long waiting list for driving tests. Due to the lockdowns and all of the delayed tests, particularly in 2020, the DVSA had around about a 9-month backlog of tests to catch up with. 9 months. That's going to take years to catch up with that level of work. So they've been putting in some measures to reduce that list. One is they've been recruiting more examiners. They've been getting examiners to do more tests, work longer hours. They seem to be on the road all the time. I do feel for them. They've also been targeting driving instructors. Me. They've been putting us under more pressure to only take pupils to test who are ready. They've always put us under pressure, but now they're doing it more intensely. Driving instructors are tested periodically to make sure we're doing our job correctly. And how often we got tested was based on our grade and time. But now they're saying, if you get a high enough pass rate and your pupils have a low enough number of faults on their tests, we will hardly ever, if ever, test you. So that's a real incentive for the driving instructor to only take pupils to test who are ready, to try and increase their pass rate, to try and avoid this check test, or standards check as they call it these days, because, well, we don't really like being tested. Some don't mind, but some really try to avoid it as much as they can. The theory is, if more people pass first time, less tests are needed, and that will shorten the waiting list. So you can see why they're doing it. But now they're targeting the pupil as well. They're trying to get the learner driver to put their test back if they're not ready, directly to the pupil. They're trying to help the learner understand if they're ready to pass. They're also trying to help learners control their nerves, which I think is helpful. It's a helpful part of this campaign. But they're also trying to guilt trip learners into putting their test back. There's actually a paragraph on the website that guilt trips learners into delaying their test. More on that one soon. So I'm going to get started on the Ready to Pass website. One of the first things you're going to see when you go on that website in big numbers and letters is 53 out of every 100 driving tests were failed between January and March 2022 in Great Britain. And I don't like this number because it's not the latest number. 53 fails out of 100 is 47 passes out of 100. So the pass rate is 47%, 47.1 actually, but the latest figure is 48.7%. Now I've got all the statistics here. You can see it go back to 2007/8, financial years, April to April, longer than I've been doing the job. I've been doing it since 2009. And you see how many tests are conducted, generally between 1.4 and 1.7 million, and how many passes, and the pass rate. And the pass rate is normally between 45 and 47%. But if we look at the latest financial year, broken down into quarters, you can see the pass rate is higher, 51.6, 49.6, 48.1 and 47.1. And I got an email this week from the DVSA quoting the 47.1 pass rate and how it's gone down 1% compared to the previous quarter, when they're not looking at the most recent quarter, which they have available to them, which has actually gone up to 48.7. So they're cherry picking the statistic they want to convey the message they want. They want to be putting instructors under more pressure to only get pupils to take tests when they're ready. Now I agree with that. I agree with only getting pupils to go to test when they're ready, but I don't agree with being unclear with statistics. And I think that the pass rate is actually probably going to go down as the backlog decreases. I think the pass rate is slightly higher at the moment because people have had more time to learn to drive due to the longer waiting lists. Therefore, they're more likely to pass. And as the waiting list reduces, I think the pass rate will normalise and maybe go lower than it was before, simply because learning to drive now, in my opinion, is harder. The recent changes to the highway code, in my opinion, make learning to drive harder, and they make driving less safe. They make driving in general harder. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to have more deaths on the road. Fortunately, that doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean we're going to have more collisions than previous years. And that's because cars are getting safer. Cars are helping drivers avoid more collisions. So even if the rule changes and the highway code changes are potentially worse than they were before, well, I think, fortunately, accident numbers and deaths will come down on the roads. The next part here is trying to get you to push your test back if you're not ready. And I do agree with this. If you're not ready, don't take your test. The website says, if you're not ready to pass, it's best to move your test back. It's the best way of getting your independence and freedom as soon as possible. And then in big writing, move your test back if you're not ready, to really try and push that message home. Goes on to say, moving your driving test back if you're not ready can give you vital time to brush up on your skills, take a few more mock tests, and make sure you're ready to pass. Now for the guilt trip. By moving your test, you'll free up an appointment for someone who is ready to take their test. This could help them get their dream job or help with caring for their family. I don't like that, because that's a guilt trip and you don't know who's going to take your test if you give it up. It could be someone who's less ready than you are. But I do agree with moving your test back if you're not ready. You're better off putting that money into lessons instead of wasting it on the test. And also, if everybody did this, that would significantly shorten the waiting list. The website tries to help you understand whether or not you're ready to take your driving test. It says, how to know when you're ready for test. You do not need any prompts from your driving instructor, and that's true. If your driving instructor is prompting you, then you're probably not ready for test. Your examiner is not going to prompt you. Point 2, you do not make silly mistakes when you're driving. Now, the reason why they've said this, in my opinion, is because many people say when they fail a test, oh, I just made a silly mistake. But the DVSA aren't buying it. They're saying if you're making silly mistakes, you're not ready. You're making silly mistakes on your test. You're going to make silly mistakes after your test. You're not ready to have a license yet. But of course, as we all know, nerves can play a part too. Point 3, you pass a mock driving test. Absolutely. If you're failing your mock driving tests, you're probably going to fail the real test. Point 4, you can control your nerves. Aha, that's good advice, because yes, you do need to be able to control your nerves to pass your driving test. I often say to my pupils, to pass, you need to have knowledge, you need to have skill, and you need to have confidence. If you don't have either of those 3 things, you're probably not going to pass. And the last point, your driving instructor agrees you're ready. Yes, listen to your driving instructor. They know what it takes to pass the driving test. And they also go on to say it's free to move your test. So they're really encouraging you to move your test if you're not ready. It's free to move your test as long as you do it at least 3 full working days being Monday to Saturday, before your test. It says in big letters, keep track of your progress. They're trying to encourage you to keep track of your progress so that you know when you're ready. They also go on to say it's best to take driving lessons with a driving instructor and have private practice with family or friends. Driving instructors are road safety experts trained to help you learn to drive. People who have a combination of both, that is both driving lessons and practice with family or friends, do best when they take their test. And I agree. Generally speaking, pupils who learn to drive with an instructor and with a friend or family member, if you need some insurance for doing that, I actually have a link in the description. I'll mention it later. People who do both are more likely to pass. That is my experience, although not always. Occasionally, I may be helping someone and they're going away, having private practice and then coming back and they're worse. And that's because their supervisor isn't helping. Sometimes the supervisor can be putting them under too much pressure or getting them to drive in a bad way. If that's the case, then it's not helpful. But generally speaking, a combination of lessons and private practice is best. They then go on to quote the average number of hours it takes to pass a driving test. They say on average it takes people 45 hours of driving lessons with a driving instructor and 22 hours of private practice with family or friends to learn to drive. And I don't agree with these numbers. The DVSA do not record how many lessons pupils take when they do their driving test. The only thing the DVSA can do is ask driving instructors and ask pupils, and driving instructors and pupils are more likely to underquote the figure to make themselves look better. But the main reason why, there's two main reasons actually, two main reasons why I don't agree with quoting this figure is because the range is so huge. And when you have a big range, having the mean average in the middle is meaningless, because if the majority of people aren't near it, then what's the point in knowing the average? When people ask me how long it takes to learn to drive, I say some people learn in under 20 hours, some people learn in over 100. Most people are somewhere in the middle. The other major reason why I have a problem with this number is that for the people who take longer, let's say someone's had 60 hours of lessons and they look at that number and they go, oh, 45, I must be ready by now. It only encourages them to take their driving test earlier than when they're ready. You're ready to take your driving test when you're ready. Now for the silly mistakes. The DVSA aren't buying silly mistakes. They believe that if you make a silly mistake on your driving test, you're making it during your lessons and during your private practice. In big letters, it says, if you're making silly mistakes, 1 in 5 people who fail their driving test say the main reason they fail is because they made a silly mistake on the day. If you're making silly mistakes during your driving lessons or private practice, it means you're not ready to drive safely on your own yet. And that is true. If you're making silly mistakes during your lessons and during private practice, then you shouldn't be taking your driving test, because you're probably going to make a silly mistake on your test. It then goes on to say, the best way to avoid making silly mistakes is practice, practice, practice. You'll be ready to take your test when you're reaching level 5 on all of the driving skills on the learner driver's record during every lesson you have. Now, the learner driver's record that they've produced, I'm not fond of. What I don't like about the record of pupils' progress that they've produced is the layout. The idea in a pupil's record is to help them understand how much progress they've made and how much progress is left to be made. This doesn't do that very easily. At the top, you have date of lesson and only 10 boxes. Most people take more than 10 lessons, so most people are going to have multiple records. Also, the record is over 3 sheets of paper. So you're going to end up with lots of pieces of paper to try and figure out how far you've come. Also, you don't cover each subject, each lesson. So you can have numbers in some places and blank spaces dotted around all over the piece of paper. It's going to look like Sudoku. It's going to look like the matrix code. There's a much easier way to do this. They've got a scale at the top, 1 to 5, where you can put that where it says date of lesson. I actually have a scale of 1 to 3, but 1 to 5 is fine. And when the pupil achieves level 1, you tick. Level 2, you tick. And you end up with ticks in each subject and blank spaces. And if you're smart, you can keep it to 1 page. I have. You can do it. So then you can just look at the piece of paper and you can see in a snapshot how many ticks you've got, how many blank spaces you have. Therefore, it's easy to tell how far you've come. They are encouraging you to take mock tests. In big letters, it says, take mock driving tests. Can't get clearer than that, and I agree. They say, you'd never take an exam without doing a few mock exam papers first. And you probably took more than 1 mock theory test before taking the real thing. Mock driving tests are just as important. 1 in 5 people who fail their driving test say the main reason they failed is because they were marked too harshly. And I agree with that. I meet plenty of people who have failed their driving test who say they were marked too harshly, yet I've sat in on most of the driving tests my pupils have done, and I find generally the examiners do a good job. Goes on to say, benefits of mock tests. Take mock tests with your driving instructor too. Get used to how the driving test works. Understand the standard that's expected. Understand how the marking works, so you're not left thinking you were marked too harshly during the real thing. Talk to your driving instructor about taking mock tests. They might suggest you take a mock test with a different instructor, so you are used to driving with someone you do not know. Now, I agree, taking mock tests is great, very important before you take the real test. I'm not sure about taking a mock test with a different instructor though. Instructors are not the same as examiners. They are not trained in the same way. An examiner is very broad. They're very open-minded in how you drive. As long as you drive safely and legally, they are likely to pass you. Different instructors teach differently. So you may have learned with instructor A, you go to do a mock test with instructor B, and instructor B starts marking you down for things that instructor A hasn't taught you to do. Something I like about this campaign is that the DVSA seem to be taking nerves seriously. When I was becoming a driving instructor back in 2008, when I was training, I had a DVD, and there's one thing I remember from that DVD. It was that nerves are common on driving tests, but they're rarely the cause for a driving test fail. And I believed it. I thought, oh really? Until I become a driving instructor and realised actually nerves often cause a driving test fail. So on the campaign's website, in big letters, it says, learn to control your nerves. 1 in 10 people who fail their driving test say the main reason they failed is because they were too nervous. Everyone is nervous to some level when taking their driving test. Driving examiners expect that. They'll do their best to help you relax. Now, that's true to some extent. Some examiners are better at helping you relax than others. But don't feel bad if your examiner's a little bit frosty. Just try and understand them. They're doing the same thing day in, day out, and they might get a little bit bored, which is why they might not be really jovial. I actually have a lot of respect for the examiners who manage to remain jovial and have a good sense of humour day in, day out, doing all those tests. I don't think it's something I would be good at. There's a big difference between a driving examiner and a driving instructor. The two jobs are very different. Being able to control your nerves is a really important skill. And not just for your driving test. You might be nervous the first time you drive in an unfamiliar city on your own, have to deal with a really complex roundabout, or drive on country roads at night. So learning how to control your nerves is a vital skill for new drivers. Talk to your driving instructor about mindfulness training. Mindfulness can help you to manage anxiety, feel relaxed, and stay focused. So what is mindfulness training? Well, I recommend you look into it. You could Google it to find out more. I've looked into it. I've never heard of it before. And my interpretation of it is it's something people have been doing for generations, but we're calling it something different now. I interpret it as being more in the present, understanding your feelings, your emotions, accepting them and not judging yourself for them. For example, let's say you feel nervous. One thing you could do is pretend you're not nervous, but you still are. And those nerves are likely to have control over you because you're not aware of them, because you're ignoring them. Another thing you could do is accept them. Understand them, accept them, but don't judge yourself for them. That way, you're more aware of them. And if you're more aware of it, they're less likely to control you. Mindfulness is also about being present. So instead of constantly regretting the past or wishing the past was still the present or worrying about the future or looking forward to the future, to finishing your studies or moving on to the next step, always being ahead or always being behind or both, try and be present more often and focus on what you're doing now. Try and enjoy what you're doing every day, whatever it is. There is enjoyment that you can have from most things you do. If you take back some control by being aware of your emotions and you focus on the present, your mind is now, well, I would guess that would give you a better chance of passing your driving test. Because I see it on driving tests. My pupils are worrying about what might happen later or what might have happened in the past, or what did happen in the past. That way they're not putting their energy into what they're doing right now, which means their performance is lower. So, yeah, mindfulness. I recommend looking into it. I do think that it's not anything new. It's something people have been doing for a long time. We're just calling it something different now. But I do think it can help. And I do appreciate that the DVSA are starting to take driving test nerves a bit more seriously and offer advice. The Ready to Pass campaign is also trying to make sure that your test actually goes ahead. In big writing again, it says, take the right things to your test. This number surprised me. On average, more than 1,100 driving tests get cancelled every month. I thought it was going to say year. Every month, because people forget to take the right documents with them. Take a car that does not meet the rules. If you're interested in what car you can take to driving test, I'll leave a link to a video I made all about it in the top right hand corner of your screen. Another one is they arrive late for their appointment. Well, yeah, that can be tricky sometimes because you're not allowed to get there too early and traffic can get very bad, particularly if you've got a morning test. That's why it's better to get near the test centre quite a bit before your test goes ahead. Just be in the area so you're ready. Or they go to the wrong driving test centre. I've not known that to happen before. I'm not sure how common that happens, and I suppose it could happen if the pupil booked the test and maybe they accidentally, or even the instructor booked the test and they just accidentally clicked on the wrong test centre thing on the website when they were booking it. And it says, don't be one of them. There's also some useful links on the Ready to Pass campaign's website for using your own car. As I said, I've already given you a link to a video I made. The show and tell questions, I've done a video about that. I'll leave a link in the description. And the top 10 faults that people make on their test. I've done a video about that as well. I'll leave a link to that in the description also if you're interested. But there's links to the DVSA's advice on the website. Overall, I think the Ready to Pass campaign is good. What I don't like about it is cherry picking the pass rate to make it sound worse than it actually is. I don't see why they would do that. What I do actually is because they want instructors to push pupils to this campaign. So in trying to advertise it, they send out an email to make the pass rate look worse than it is. That's what I think anyway. I don't know that for sure. That's my guess. I don't like the fact they've included the average amount of hours that it takes to pass the test because I'm not so sure how accurate that is. And for people who take longer, that only puts them under more pressure. And I don't like the pupil record that they produced. I don't think it's very easy to use or helpful. But overall, I think it's good because it's encouraging people to only take their test when they're ready. It's helping people understand when they will be ready. It's encouraging people to do mock tests, which I think is important. And also, it's helping driving instructors because driving instructors don't want to take people to test who aren't ready, but often it's hard to get pupils to put the test back. And this campaign can help us do that. Well, I hope the Ready to Pass campaign helps you know when you're ready to pass. If you found the video interesting, please give it a thumbs up. And if you're looking for car insurance, check out the links to Collingwood and Confused in the description. If you're learning to drive and want to insure yourself on somebody else's car, then Collingwood are there for you, because you can do so without affecting the owner's policy. And as mentioned earlier in this video, if you learn with both an instructor and with a friend or family member, you're more likely to pass. There's up to 35% off via the link at the moment and a £20 Amazon gift card. If you want to insure your own car, I recommend checking out the link to confused.com. You fill out one quote form, get loads of quotes back from many insurers to compare who's cheapest, and you can change your car on that quote without having to do the whole thing again to see how much it costs to insure different cars. So if you're car shopping, it's easy to find out how much it costs to insure the different cars. Using the links doesn't cost you anything, but it does support the channel. So thank you very much. Subscribe to get my future videos, and until the next one, cheerio.